The ground was already shaking when Lena ran. Her boots hit the mud of the outer yard and she did not slow down, did not look back, because she already knew what was behind her. The sound alone was enough. 30 wolves howling at once, and not the kind of howl that meant celebration. It was the kind that meant grief. The kind that tore out of a pack when one of their own had just stopped breathing. She had felt it 2 seconds before it happened. That was the problem. She always felt it. Lena was 18 years old, and she had spent the last 6 of those years learning to feel nothing. Or at least, to look like she felt nothing. The pack did not need to know what moved through her hands when she was near someone sick. They did not need to know that she could sense the moment a body decided to give up the way other people sensed rain before it fell. They especially did not need to know what she had done 3 nights ago in the healer storeroom, when old Noel's breathing had gone wrong and no one was around to help. She had fixed it. In under a minute. With her bare hands and something she did not have a name for. And then she had wrapped her fingers in a strip of old cloth, shoved them into her coat pocket, and gone back to sleep on her cot in the supply shed as if nothing had happened. Old Noel had woken the next morning completely fine. No one could explain it. The pack healer, a sharp-eyed woman named Greta, had been suspicious for exactly 4 hours before deciding it was a miracle from the moon goddess and moving on. Lena could not afford for anyone to look closer than that. She ducked around the side of the grain store and pressed her back against the cold stone wall. Across the yard, she could hear the pack gathering around the body of Connor Bell, a mid-ranking beta who had been strong and loud and completely healthy as of yesterday morning. She had seen him eat an entire roasted chicken at dinner. She had seen him argue with his brother over the last of the bread rolls. And then tonight, something had moved through him. She had felt it from across the hall during the evening meal. A cold thread, fine as spider silk, pulling tight around something deep inside his chest. She had stared at her plate and gripped the edge of the table and told herself it was not her problem. She was the lowest-ranked wolf in Iremore Pack. She had no business getting involved in a beta's health crisis. She had been halfway to believing herself when he collapsed face-first into his soup bowl. The chaos that followed was loud and ugly. Greta was called. 2 warriors lifted Connor and carried him to the healer's building. Lena had followed at a distance she hoped looked like general crowd curiosity rather than anything specific. When the crowd thinned and Greta disappeared into the back room to find her herbs and her tools and her complete lack of understanding of what was actually wrong with Connor Bell, Lena had slipped inside. She had 60 seconds. She pressed one hand to his chest through his shirt. The thread was worse up close. It was not a sickness she recognized. It was not infection, not organ failure, not anything her very limited understanding of medicine could name. It was more like a wrongness, something that did not belong inside a living body, winding itself tighter and tighter around the bond between his wolf and his human self. The warmth in her hands knew exactly what to do. She had only allowed it for 20 seconds before she heard Greta's footsteps returning. 20 seconds was not enough. She could feel it was not enough even as she pulled away and pressed herself into the shadow of the door frame and slid out before the healer came back into the room. Connor Bell died 11 minutes later. And now Lena was standing with her back against cold stone in the dark, her hands wrapped in her own sleeves because they were shaking too hard to hide otherwise, listening to a pack grieve a man she might have saved if she had stayed 4 seconds longer. She did not cry. She had run out of tears for things like this a long time ago. What she had instead was rage. Quiet, cold, and entirely directed inward. She heard the outer gate open before she saw the torches. 3 riders came through at a pace that said they were important and they knew it. The lead horse was black. The man on it was bigger than most of the men Lena had ever seen, and he wore no markings she could place, but the entire yard went still the moment he appeared. Not the polite stillness of greeting a guest. The deep, instinctive stillness of wolves who understood without being told that something above them in the food chain had just arrived. The Alpha King. Lena had heard his name her entire life. Calder Voss. Ruler of 7 packs. The man who had united the Northern Territories through a combination of strategic brilliance and the kind of presence that made other alphas sit down and reconsider their life choices. He was not supposed to be here. Ironmoor was a small park, unremarkable, the sort of place a king sent a representative to rather than visiting himself. She pressed further into the shadow of the grain store and watched him dismount. He was younger than she had imagined. Perhaps 26. He had dark hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been designed to make decisions efficiently, no wasted softness anywhere, all clean angles and steady eyes. Gold eyes. She could see them catch the torchlight from 40 feet away. An alpha's eyes. The pack leader, a broad man named Garrett, moved toward him with his hand extended and his chest slightly forward, which was the wolf equivalent of puffing up while also clearly trying not to look like he was puffing up. "My king," Garrett said. "This is unexpected." "I heard you lost a wolf tonight," the king said. His voice carried without effort, the way voices did when the person using them had never needed to raise them to be heard. "I was already less than an hour's ride away." "Tell me about it." Garrett began talking. Lena stopped listening to the words and focused on the king's face instead, the way his eyes moved across the yard, cataloging everything, settling briefly on each person in turn. It was the look of someone who missed nothing and chose carefully what to address. His gaze swept her corner of the yard. She went very still. His eyes moved on. She breathed. She told herself she was invisible. She was always invisible. She was the pack omega, the lowest rank, the girl who swept floors and hauled wood and was occasionally forgotten in attendance lists because no one thought to count her. Invisibility was the only advantage her rank had ever given her, and she had learned to use it like a tool. What she had not planned for was the drunk warrior. His name was Doyle, and he was one of Garrett's senior fighters, and he had been at the funeral brew since before the king arrived. He came lurching out of the inner hall door directly into Lena's carefully maintained position against the grain store wall, grabbed her by the shoulder to stop himself from falling, and then overcorrected so sharply that he shoved her instead. She stumbled. The yard was uneven stone. Her boot caught a gap and she went forward, arms out, directly into the open space between the shadows and the torchlight, and she would have gone face first into the mud except that something caught her. 2 hands. Around her upper arms. Firm, immediate, and completely effortless. She looked up. The Alpha King was looking down at her. Up close, his gold eyes were steadier than she had expected. Not warm, exactly, but not cold either. More like a fire-banked low. Controlled heat. He had caught her the way a person caught a falling cup, on pure reflex, before his brain had finished deciding whether to bother. 3 seconds passed. She became aware that the entire yard was watching. She also became aware, in a completely unwanted and deeply inconvenient way, that something had gone strange in her chest the moment his hands touched her arms. Not the healer warmth. Something else. Something with no name in her vocabulary, because nothing like it had ever happened to her before. "Are you all right?" he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. His eyes moved over her face with the same cataloging efficiency she had watched him use on the yard. Then they dropped to her hands, which she had shoved into her sleeves but not quite far enough. He could see the faint edge of the cloth she had wrapped around them 3 nights ago, the silver stain at the wrist that had not quite faded. She pulled her sleeves down the rest of the way. He let go of her arms. "Whose shed is that?" he said, looking at the small structure behind her. "It is the supply shed," Garrett said from behind him, confused. "The girl sleeps there." The king did not say anything. But something shifted in his face, some small adjustment at the corner of his jaw that Lena could not interpret. Then he turned back to Garrett and said, "Tell me more about the wolf you lost tonight. I need to know if this is the first time you have seen something like this," and the moment dissolved as if it had never happened. Lena walked back to her shed. She sat on her cot in the dark. She pressed her wrapped hands together and looked at the thin line of light under the door and listened to the yard slowly quiet down as the king's visit shifted from outdoor arrival to indoor discussion. She did not sleep for a long time. She could still feel the exact pressure of where his hands had been on her arms. And she could not decide if what scared her more was that, or the fact that when his eyes had found that silver stain, something in his expression had not looked like disgust. It had looked like recognition. Outside, the night stretched on. Somewhere in the healer's building, Connor Bell's body was being prepared for the ground. And in Lena's hands, beneath the cloth wrapping, a faint silver glow paused twice in the dark and then went quiet. Something was beginning. She did not know what it was yet. But she had the uncomfortable feeling that the Alpha King, whoever he truly was, already had a very good idea. The morning after Connor Bell's burial, Lena was on the roof of the grain store at dawn, relaying the thatch that had come loose in last week's rain, when the first scream came from the warrior's hall. She did not drop her tools. She went still instead, the way she had learned to go still when something moved in her chest that she did not want anyone to see on her face. Because she had felt something wrong in the warrior's hall when she walked past it an hour ago. A thread, the same kind that had been inside Connor, except this time it was inside two people at once. She had kept walking. She had told herself she was going to fix the thatch, and she was going to fix the thatch, and what happened in the warrior's hall was absolutely not her responsibility. The scream came again. Then a third voice joined it. Lena pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum where the warmth was building like pressure behind a dam, swung herself off the grain store roof, and landed in the yard mud. She was not the only one running toward the sound. The whole compound was coming awake. Greta was already inside the warrior's hall when Lena slipped through the door behind the press of bodies, and what Lena saw stopped her where she stood. 4 men were down. Not dead, not yet, but wrong in the exact same way Connor had been wrong. Their shifts had tried to start and failed, leaving each of them caught between forms, which was something Lena had never seen before and which looked as painful as it sounded. Greta was moving between them with a completely pale face and shaking hands, trying remedies that Lena already knew were not going to work because what was inside these men was not something that responded to herbs or rites. It responded to the thing in her hands. She walked her way to the nearest one. She crouched beside him, pressing her fingers to the side of his neck as if she was checking his pulse, which was a normal thing to do, which no one would question. The warmth moved into him. The thread inside him was thicker than Connor's had been. Stronger, more established. It took almost a minute to begin to loosen, and by the end of it Lena's nose had started bleeding, which was new and not something she particularly appreciated. She pressed her sleeve against her face and moved to the next man. She did 3 of the 4 before her hands stopped working. Not gradually. They simply stopped, the way a candle stops when there is no more wax, no warning, no wind down, just gone. She pressed her palms flat against the 4th man's arm and felt nothing move from her to him and sat back on her heels and understood that she had hit a limit she had not known existed. He was not as far gone as the others had been. He might hold until her hands came back. She did not know how long that would take. Out of the way? She looked up. Greta was standing over her, and behind Greta was the Alpha King, who had apparently not left last night after all. Lena stood. She stepped back. She pressed herself against the wall near the door the way she always pressed herself against walls, and she watched Greta kneel beside the 4th man and begin her walk, and she watched the king watch Greta, and she watched the moment he understood that Greta had no idea what she was doing. His eyes moved to the other 3 men who were already resting easier. Then they moved to Lena. She looked at the floor. "You," he said. She did not answer. "Come with me," he said. It was not a request. It was not loud or harsh, but it had the absolute certainty of someone who did not ask things twice. Lena followed him out of the warrior's hall and across the yard and into the small meeting room of the main hall, where he closed the door and turned around and looked at her with his gold eyes doing that cataloging thing again. "What did you do?" he said. "I checked their pulses," she said. 3 of them are breathing evenly," he said. "The 4th, the one you did not reach, is not. Greta has been a healer for 20 years and she cannot touch whatever this is. So I am going to ask you again, and I would like you to consider your answer carefully. What did you do?" Lena looked at him for a long moment. She thought about lying. She was good at lying. She had been lying about this her entire life. But his eyes were steady and patient and certain, and she had the feeling that he was the kind of man who would simply keep asking until the truth surfaced on its own, and she was very tired, and her hands were not working, and there was a man in the hall behind them who might not hold long enough for her to find out how wrong she was about that feeling. "I have to show you something," she said. "I need you to not call your guards until after." Something shifted in his face. "All right," he said. She unwrapped her hands. The silver staining was worse after this morning's work. It ran from her fingertips up to her wrist in branching lines like frost on glass, vivid against her skin. She held them out in the light coming through the narrow window and watched him look at them. He did not step back. He did not call for anyone. He looked at her hands the way he had looked at the yard the night before, taking in information, organizing it, deciding what it meant. "Void magic," he said. "Yes," she said. "You can see what is wrong with them," he said. "It looks like threads," she said. "Pulled tight around the bond between their wolf and their self. I can loosen them. I do not know if I can fully break them. I have never tried on something this old or this strong." "How long have you been hiding this?" 6 years. "In this park?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "And no one knows?" "One person almost knew," she said. But she decided it was a miracle instead. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like an acknowledgement that the answer was more interesting than he expected. "And you let her believe that?" "It was easier," Lena said. "Void magic users are burned in this kingdom." "I have been careful." "You were less careful this morning," he said. "There were 4 of them," she said flatly. "I did not have time to be careful." He looked at her for another long moment. Then he turned, opened the door, and said to the man standing outside it, "Bring me a chair." When the chair arrived, he set it in the middle of the room, sat down in it, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and looked at her in a way that made her feel like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at, which was a feeling she had never once had before and did not know what to do with. "I have lost 9 wolves in the last 2 months," he said. "Across 7 packs. All of them the same as what I saw in that hall this morning. The same as what you felt in Korryn last night." Lena went still. "You felt it in him before he died," the king said. Not a question. "Yes," she said quietly. "And you pulled back." She did not answer. She did not need to. He did not push it. She had expected him to. She had expected him to be angry, the way Alphas were angry, large and loud and righteous. Instead he just absorbed it, whatever it meant to him, and moved on. "The curse is spreading," he said. "My healers cannot touch it. My elders cannot name it. I have spent 2 months watching healthy wolves go down inside a week with no pattern I can predict and no intervention I can make that slows it at all." He looked at her hands. "Until this morning. When a girl with a power my kingdom would burn her for walked into a room and did in 3 minutes what no one else has managed in 60 days. Lena's throat was tight. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I want to make you a bargain," he said. "I am an Omega," she said. "In a small pack. You are the king of 7 territories. What could I possibly want from you that you would actually give?" His gold eyes were direct. "What do you want?" he said. Not rhetorical. He meant it. And Lena, who had not been asked what she wanted by anyone in 6 years, felt the question land somewhere deep and unprotected. She thought of the supply shed. The scraps at dinner. The way no one counted her in attendance list. The way Doyle had grabbed her last night like a piece of furniture that had gotten in his way. "I want a life," she said. "My own. Not belonging to a pack that does not want me. My own land. My own name on my own door. Something that cannot be taken by the next Alpha who decides Omegas do not count." He looked at her for a long moment. "Save my people," he said, "and you have it. In writing, before any pack elder, binding under crown law." He paused. "I will ride with you to every infected pack myself. You will not be alone in this." Lena looked at the Alpha King sitting in a plain wooden chair in a small meeting room in the smallest park in his territory, talking to the lowest-ranked wolf he had ever encountered as if she was the most important person in the room. She looked at her silver-stained hands. She thought about what it had felt like when his hands caught her in the yard last night. That strange unnamed thing in her chest that had no language in her experience. She told herself that was irrelevant to the bargain. I need to check if the fourth man in the hall is holding, she said. Of course, he said, and stood, and opened the door for her. She walked through it. She did not look back. She was almost certain he watched her go. By the time the sun was fully up, Lena had understood three things with complete clarity. The first was that the curse was not random. It moved through bonds, the invisible threads that connected wolves to their pack, their rank, their inner animal. The strongest bonds carried it fastest. That was why it hit alphas and senior betas first, why it left omegas largely untouched. She was the least bonded wolf in any pack she had ever set foot in. She was almost immune by neglect. The second thing she understood was that her magic was not what the old text called it. She had read 2 books about void magic, both stolen from the healer's shelf when Greta was not looking, both describing it in language that made it sound like a destructive force, something that emptied and unmade. That was not what she experienced. What she experienced was closer to the feeling of finding a tangle in a rope and working it loose, patient and precise. The warmth in her hands was not void. It was repair. The third thing she understood was that the man now riding beside her on the road north to the second infected pack was watching her more carefully than he was watching the road, and he was not doing it the way men watched omegas, which was usually with contempt or dismissal or the specific blankness of people who had decided someone did not exist. He was watching her the way he had watched the yard on arrival, the way he watched everything, cataloging and measuring, but there was something under it that she could not name. She did not try to name it. She had enough to think about. His name, she had confirmed, was Caden. She had heard his advisors call him that in the brief hour they had spent in Ironmoor before departure. Not my king or sire, just Caden, which suggested the men around him had been around him long enough to be easy, and that he permitted it, which said something about him she had not expected. She said his name in her head twice and then stopped doing that. What does it feel like? He said. They were half an hour out of Ironmoor and the road had gone quiet around them, his guard of 4 riding ahead and behind at a distance that gave them something close to privacy. What does what feel like? She said. The thing in your hands, he said. She thought about it honestly. Warm, she said. But not like heat. More like pressure. Like something that wants to move and I have to decide to let it go, she paused. When I hold it back it costs more than when I let it through. I learned to hold it back young and I was doing it wrong for years. What happened when you let it through wrong? He said. I got sick, she said. Not badly. Mostly I just lost days. Woke up and it was a different morning than I went to sleep in. And now? Now I lose it from my hands, she said. The silver. And sometimes my nose bleeds. And if I push too hard I stop being able to do it at all until it builds back up, she flexed her fingers on the reins. I have limits I am still finding. How long to build back after this morning, he said. I do not know. This morning was the most I have used at once since I was 12, she looked at him sideways. I will tell you when I am ready for the next one. He nodded. Accepted. No push, no negotiation. She had half expected him to start calculating her as a resource, measuring her output against his need. He did not do that. The pack we are going to, she said. How many are down? 6 as of yesterday, he said. 2 warriors, 3 betas, 1 elder. Are any of them children? Something passed across his face. Not yet, he said. She heard the not yet the way it was meant to be heard. I will need to touch each of them, she said. It does not need to look like anything specific. Pressing a hand to the shoulder works. I just need contact. I will handle the introductions, he said. The pack alpha there is a man named Owen. He will want answers. I will give him the ones that do not mention you. You are surprisingly comfortable lying, she said. I am surprisingly comfortable with nuance, he said. Those are different things. She almost smiled. She caught it before it happened and looked at the road instead. The second pack was called Dusk Ridge, and it sat at the edge of a pine forest where the trees grew so close together that even midday looked like early evening. The Alpha, Owen, was a gray-haired man who met them at the gate with the look of someone who had not slept in 2 weeks, which was probably accurate. 6 down, Owen said, walking them inside. I lost my best tracker this morning. He was the strongest wolf in the pack. 28 years old, he shook his head. Greta, the healer from Ironmoor, she sent a message to try certain herbs. We tried them. Nothing. My companion is going to walk through the recovery room, Kaden said. She is an assessor. Do not ask her questions while she works. Owen looked at Lena for the first time since they arrived. He took in her rank markings, or lack of them, and the look on his face was the familiar one, the one that said Omega and immediately downgraded every assumption. That girl, he said. That girl, Kaden said, in a tone that ended the question. Lena walked into the recovery room. 6 people. She went through them methodically, spending as long as she dared on each one, moving faster on the less advanced cases and slower on the 2 that were near the point Connor Bell had reached. By the time she was done, her hands were shaking again and the silver lines had spread past her wrists, and she could feel a headache building behind her eyes like a slow tide. She came out of the room and stood in the corridor. Kaden was at her side before she had decided to reach for the wall. I need to sit down, she said. He did not make a thing of it. He simply turned and said to Owen, we need a room for the night, and Owen, looking confused and somewhat alarmed, showed them to 2 rooms side by side near the main hall. Lena sat on the bed in the smaller room and stared at her hands until the shaking slowed. There was a knock. She said nothing, which apparently was enough, because the door opened and Kaden came in with a plate of food that he set on the low table near the window. He sat in the room's one chair. He did not say anything. She looked at the food and realized she was hungry in a way that went beyond normal hunger, the deep pull of a body that had spent a lot of energy and wanted it back. She ate without speaking. He waited without speaking. When she was done, he said, tell me if any of them are going to make it without more time from you. 4 of them are going to hold, she said. The other 2 I am not sure about. I need another session in the morning before we leave. Then we stay 2 nights, he said simply. She looked at him. You have 6 more packs to visit. We have 6 more packs to visit, he said. And we will visit them after you are ready. Not before. Lena looked at the empty plate. She looked at her hands, at the silver lines beginning to fade now that she was still. She looked at the window where the pine forest pressed dark and close against the glass. Why, she said. Why what, he said. Why does it matter to you how ready I am, she said. You need what I can do? Most men in your position would be calculating how fast they could move me from one pack to the next. He was quiet for a moment. Do you know how the ash blight spreads, he said. Through pack bonds, she said. I told you. Yes, he said. And an alpha's bond to their pack is the strongest one that exists. Which means I am more at risk than anyone, he looked at her steadily. I am not telling you this so you will hurry. I am telling you this so you understand that I have a personal reason to keep you functional. A burnout resource does not help anyone. Least of all me. It was a practical answer. A calculated one. She believed it, and she also did not entirely believe it, because the way he had been at her side before she reached the wall was faster than calculation, and there was something in his face right now that was not the face of a man running numbers. She did not say any of that. Get some sleep, she said. I will be ready in the morning. He stood. He moved to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. I read about void magic 3 years ago, he said. After a text came through from the Eastern Territories about a man who had used it to bring a river back after a drought. The elders called it an abomination. I thought it was the most remarkable thing I had ever heard. She stared at his back. I did not say that publicly, he said. But I thought it, and then he left and closed the door. Lena sat with that for a long time in the dark. She told herself it did not mean anything. Her hands, lying open in her lap, paused Silver twice and went still. The third pack was harder. Not because of the number of people afflicted, but because of what she found inside the sickest one. Kaden had told her on the road that the pack was called Greywater, and that the Alpha there was young, only 20, and had just taken over from his father who had died of natural causes 6 weeks prior. What he had not told her, because he did not know, was that the youngest Alpha in the territory was carrying a strain of the curse that was not the same as what she had seen in the other packs. She knew it the moment she touched him. His name was Will. He was lying on a cot in the main hall with the look of someone who had stopped being surprised by pain and had moved past it into somewhere quieter and more frightening. He was young enough that it hurt to look at. When she pressed her hand to his shoulder, what she felt inside him was not threats. It was a knot. She had not seen a knot before. It was dense and ancient and wound so tightly into the center of his backbone that pulling at it without knowing what she was doing could break the bond entirely rather than free it. Which would mean something much worse than what he was already experiencing. She sat back on her heels and thought. Behind her, she could feel Kaden watching. "This one is different," she said quietly. She heard him move closer. He crouched beside her, near enough that she could see the line of his jaw in her peripheral vision, the particular kind of tight-held quiet he had in moments that required calm. "Different how?" he said. "The others had threads," she said. "This is a knot. Someone tied it. Deliberately. This is not the same curse spreading naturally through pack bonds. This one was placed here, by someone who knew what they were doing." She looked at Will's pale face. "How old is Greywater Pack?" 300 years, he said. "This knot is at least 2 generations old," she said. "It was placed when he was born. Or before. It has been growing inward ever since, waiting for the right conditions to close." She pressed her lips together. His father dying and triggering an Alpha transition gave it exactly what it needed. Silence. "Can you take it out?" Kaden said. "Yes," she said. "But not the way I have been working. If I pull threads apart and the knot slips, I will sever his bond entirely. I need to work from the inside out. I need to go deeper than I have gone before." She paused. "It is going to take longer and cost more. I will probably not be functional afterward for 2 or 3 days." She felt him look at her. Not at Will. At her. "And if you do not try," he said. "He has 4 days," she said. "Maybe 5. Kaden was quiet for a breath. 2. "Tell me what you need," he said. She almost said she did not need anything. Old habit. She caught it. "I need quiet," she said. "And I need someone to pull me back if I push too far. I will not know when I am doing it. I need someone outside to watch my hands. If the silver goes past my elbows, pull me back." He nodded. He sat down on the floor beside the cot without any of the self-consciousness that she would have expected from a king sitting on a packed earth floor next to an Omega in a wolf pack's main hall. He sat like someone who had made a decision and was entirely comfortable with it. "I am ready," he said. Lena took a breath. She placed both hands on Will's chest. She closed her eyes. And she went in. The inside of a pack bond was not something she had language for. She had touched the edges of others before, felt the way they resonated with connection and history and the accumulated weight of belonging. This one was ancient and layered and deeply, deeply sad, because somewhere in the middle of all that accumulated history was a wound that had been built into it on purpose, by someone who had hated this pack enough to curse its bloodline before the current Alpha's grandfather was born. She found the knot. It was precise as a piece of craftsmanship, complex as anything she had ever seen. She began, very carefully, to find the outermost loop. Time stopped meaning anything. She worked by feel and warmth and the particular kind of listening that was not hearing but was something else, something her hands did that she had never been able to explain, paying attention with the part of herself that was not mind or body. The knot had 7 layers. She got through 4 of them before she felt the warmth start to thin. She kept going. The silver was burning up her arms. She knew it without looking. She could feel the heat of it, the way it felt when she pushed past what her body wanted to give and started taking from somewhere deeper. She had been here once before, when she was 12 and she had found a dying dog in the road and kept trying long past the point of good sense. She had been in bed for a week after that. This was going to be worse than the dog. 5 layers. 6. Something grabbed her arm. Not hard. Not panicked. Firm and deliberate and grounding, like an anchor dropped before a current could take hold. She felt it at a remove, through the fog of deep work, and it pulled her attention back toward the surface just enough. She looked at her hands without opening her eyes. In whatever internal sense she was using, the silver had gone past her elbows. She found the 7th layer. She pulled. The knot came apart. The sound it made inside her was like a rope snapping under pressure, a single clean note of release, and then Will's spark bond rang out through her hands like a bell struck at full force, and she felt every person in Greywater Park simultaneously shift with it, and then the warmth in her hands went out like a blown candle, completely and absolutely, and she fell. She did not hit the floor. Arms caught her. The same steadiness as the yard in Ironmore, the same effortless, immediate catch. She was aware of being held upright, of the cold stone wall at her back, of a voice near her ear saying her name in a way she had never heard it said before, low and direct and specific, not hey or girl or omega or nothing at all, but Lena, her actual name, used by someone who intended it. I am all right, she said. She was not sure that was true. Will is breathing, Caden said. Still near her ear. All 7 wolves he bonded are responding. They are all awake. Good, she said. That is good. She was aware that her head was against his shoulder. She decided to address that in a moment when the room had stopped tilting. The knot was deliberate, she said. Someone caused this bloodline generations back. That means the ash blight in your other packs might not be a spreading illness at all. It might be multiple individual attacks from the same original source. She felt him go still. Or one source that set many knots in the same season, she said. I need to check every afflicted wolf to see if any of them have knots versus threats. Because the treatment is different and the implication is different. What is the implication? He said. She lifted her head. She was steadier now, the room mostly level. She looked at him and he was close enough that she could see the particular way his gold eyes had shifted from the controlled banked fire look they usually held into something that had less distance in it. If there are knots in multiple packs, she said, then someone placed them. Probably someone still alive. Probably someone who has been watching your packs for years and waiting for the right trigger for each one, she paused. You do not have a spreading curse. You have a person behind this. Silence. And they are very patient, she said, and very skilled, and they have been inside your territory for at least 3 generations. Caden looked at her for a long moment. We leave for the 4th pack at dawn, he said. We leave at mid-morning, she said. I cannot walk for at least 2 days. Mid-morning, he said, without argument. She looked at her hands. The silver had faded entirely. Her fingers felt as ordinary as they had ever felt, and also more thoroughly empty than she had ever experienced. She flexed them and felt nothing, not even the waiting warmth. She had never been without it before. She had not understood until this moment how much of what she thought of as herself was also that warmth, how much she had built her entire internal identity around managing and concealing a power she had never once thought of as part of who she was. Without it, even temporarily, she felt like a room with all its furniture removed. It will come back, Caden said. She had not realized she was staring at her hands. Yes, she said. You know that with certainty, he said. It has always come back, she said. Usually faster when I eat. My body treats it like fuel. He stood, and she heard him speaking quietly to someone at the door, and then food arrived, and she ate it without tasting it, and he sat in the room's chair and read reports his riders had brought, and they were both in the same room and not speaking, and it was the most comfortable silence she could ever remember being inside. She fell asleep sitting upright with her back against the wall and her empty hands in her lap, and she did not dream. She woke to grey morning light and the sound of rain and the warmth already rebuilding in her hands like a small fire freshly lit, and for the first time in her life she did not immediately push it down. She let it sit in her palms, and she looked at the empty chair where he had been reading, and she thought about everything she had said to him and everything he had said back, and she thought about a king who sat on packed earth floors and remembered paragraphs about void magic from 3 years prior and caught people before they hit the ground without making it seem like anything worth noting. She thought about this carefully for several minutes. And then she stood up, went to find water to wash her face, and told herself firmly that they had work to do and she was going to focus on the work. She mostly believed herself. On the morning of the 14th day, Lena found the second knot. It was in the 5th park, a settlement called Ash Hollow, and it was inside the park's senior healer, a woman in her 50s named Vera who had been the last person anyone expected to fall. Vera had been managing her own symptoms quietly for 2 weeks by the time Lena reached her, the way healers always did, diagnosing themselves last and poorly, convinced that understanding a thing gave some protection against it. The knot inside Vera was different from Will's. Tighter. Older. And tied around something more specific than just the wolf to self bond. It was wound directly around Vera's healing ability, the precise, narrow gift that some wolves carried alongside their shift. Whoever had placed it had known exactly what they were targeting. Lena sat with Vera's hands between hers for a long time after she understood what she was looking at. "Can you fix it?" Kaden said from the doorway. "Yes," she said. But this one was aimed at something specific. Someone knew she was a healer. This was not a general curse on the bloodline. This was a targeted removal of a specific skill from a specific person. She saw his expression change. They knew who they were hurting, she said. Whoever placed this understood pack structure well enough to identify the healer and take them out. That is not an old sleeping curse. That is recent, active, deliberate targeting. How recent? He said. She checked. The knot had the particular texture of something still being tightened rather than sitting at maximum tension. It was placed within the last 6 months, she said. And it has been worsening regularly. Someone is maintaining it. Kaden came fully into the room. He stood beside her and looked at Vera's sleeping face. "Someone is close to my packs," he said quietly. "Close enough to make contact. To monitor and adjust." "Yes," she said. "That means someone I trust," he said. She did not soften it. "Almost certainly," she said. The room was very quiet. Outside, Ash Hollow went about its morning, wolves unaware that the woman who had healed their children and their parents and their grandparents was lying in a cot with a 6-month-old invisible wound being held open by someone in their territory. "Fix her," Kaden said. Lena fixed her. This one only took 40 minutes, because she understood the structure better now, because she had learned from Will and the others and her hands remembered. Vera stirred halfway through and opened her eyes and looked at Lena without confusion or alarm, just a long, considering look, and then closed her eyes again and let her continue. When it was done, Vera said, without opening her eyes, "You have her gift." "I do not know whose gift it is," Lena said. "It is mine." "Yes," Vera said. "That is what I mean." Lena did not know what to do with that. She removed her hands and stood. Outside the room, Kaden was waiting. His council rider, a compact and permanently serious man named Paul, was standing beside him with a sealed message in his hand and a face that said the message was not good news. Lena moved past them toward the water basin at the end of the corridor. She could hear Kaden break the seal. She could hear the slight change in his breathing that she had learned to read over 14 days of close proximity, the particular shift that meant something had happened that he would need to handle and did not want to show on his face. She dried her hands and turned around. Paul had gone. Kaden was standing with the broken message in one hand and the expression she had come to think of as his public face, which was controlled and complete and showed nothing. "What happened?" she said. "The High Council has summoned me," he said. "About," she said, though she already knew. About you, he said. Specifically about the fact that I am traveling with a void magic user and have apparently been seen by enough people that the information reached the council before I expected. Lena's stomach tightened. What does a summons from the High Council mean? It means they want me to answer for using forbidden magic, he said. And to surrender the user for trial. She looked at him. She kept her face level. And what are you going to do? She said. He looked back at her with those gold eyes that had a way of making her feel like the only thing in the room worth looking at. I am going to send them an answer, he said. Which is, she said. No, he said simply. She stared at him. We have 2 more packs, he said. We finish what we started. Then I deal with the council. They will challenge your crown, she said. Let them, he said. Lena pressed her lips together. She looked at the floor. She looked at the corridor. She looked back at him. That is a very large thing to risk, she said, for someone you met 2 weeks ago. He was quiet for a moment. I have spent 2 weeks watching you walk through pain in 6 different parks for people who would not have crossed the street to help you, he said. I have watched you hold back when you were afraid and go forward when you were more afraid, and I have watched you save 43 wolves who would have died within the month, he paused. I am not risking my crown for someone I met 2 weeks ago. I am risking it for the only person in my kingdom who has spent her entire life keeping her power hidden because she had no reason to believe anyone would protect her. He held her gaze. I am giving her a reason. Lena's chest did something complicated. She had lived her life in the economy of survival. You measured what things cost, you chose the ones you could afford, you did not let yourself want things that were priced above your means. She had never had anything to protect. She had never had anyone protect her. She said nothing for a moment that stretched too long. Then she said, we should leave for the 6th pack by noon. Yes, he said, and turned to organize it, and she went back to the corridor to collect herself somewhere he was not looking. Paul found her there 5 minutes later with a message from the council's courier requesting acknowledgement of the summons. Lena took the paper, borrowed a pen, and wrote on the back, received, nothing more. She gave it back to Paul. Is that the king's answer? Paul said. No, she said. That is mine. His answer has already been sent. She walked back toward the yard. Tell the riders we leave at noon. Paul stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he almost smiled and went to tell the riders. The 6th pack fell quickly, 4 thread cases, nothing new. Her hands were in form and she was in and out in under 3 hours. The 7th pack, the last, was the one she had been dreading without being able to articulate why. It was called Iron Root, and it was the oldest pack in the territory, and when they rode through its gate on the morning of the 17th day, Lena felt it before she saw it. Not threads. Not knots. Something larger. She sat on her horse in the gate yard and went completely still. Caden stopped beside her. What is it? He said. The whole pack, she said. What do you mean? He said. The curse is in the pack bond itself, she said. Not in individual wolves. The bond that holds all of them together, the shared root. It is a single massive knot and it has been growing inward for at least 50 years, she pressed her hand to her own sternum. Every wolf in this pack is being slowly affected by the same root. When the bond breaks, it will not be one wolf. It will be all of them. At once. The yard was quiet. 60 wolves, going about their morning, entirely unaware. Caden sat very still on his horse. How long? He said. 2 weeks, she said. Maybe 3. And you can break it, he said. I do not know, she said honestly. I have never tried to reach a pack bond root. I do not know if I can get deep enough. I do not know what it will cost, she looked at her hands. The knot inside will was 7 layers. This will be more. Tell me what you need, he said. The same words as Greywater. The same steadiness. She looked at him. I need time, she said. I need to understand it before I go in. And I need you nearby when I do. Then we take the time, he said. And I will be there. She spent 2 days studying the bond route, touching it at the edges, learning its structure, mapping it from the outside the way she imagined a builder might study a damaged foundation before deciding how to take it apart without bringing the house down. She made Kaden describe pack bond structure to her from the Alpha perspective, the way it felt to hold it, the way it moved, the way it changed under stress. He talked for 2 hours without impatience, patient and precise, and she listened and cross-referenced everything against what her hands could feel. On the 3rd morning she said, "I am ready." The Iron Root Alpha, a steady man named Gus, had been told only that she was there to assess. He brought her to the great hall where his senior pack members were gathered for their morning gathering, and she stood in the center of them, 60 wolves, and pressed her hands flat to the packed earth floor. The pack bond route was below everything, deeper than the building, deep as the land itself, 3 generations of shared wolf life compressed into something as old and dense as stone. She went in. She understood immediately that she had underestimated it. Not in the sense of turning back. There was no turning back. She understood that before she found the first layer of the knot, which was so large it felt less like a tangled rope and more like a collapsed wall. She began at the edges. Patient. Methodical. The warmth moved from her hands through the floor and into the root, and she began to find each point of crossing and work it loose, one at a time, the way she had learned to walk, precise and unhurried. She did not count layers. There was no point. She worked until she could feel the warmth thinning. She kept going. The silver was past her elbows. She knew it without looking. She kept going. Her nose was bleeding. She knew it. She kept going. At some point the floor was against her cheek instead of her palms. She kept going. The warmth was a thread now. She was burning the last of it, the reserve under the reserve, the part she had never reached before. She could feel it the way she imagined a candle could feel the last quarter inch of itself, the distinct edge of running out. The knot had 1 layer left. She pulled every last thing she had into it and pulled. The root rang. It was not a sound. It was not something ears could hear. It moved through the ground and through the walls and through the bodies of 60 wolves who gasped simultaneously as if they had all just surfaced from cold water. She felt it move through her own hands and chest and spine and all the way out, and then the warmth went out again, exactly as it had in grey water, except this time it took everything with it. She was very far down. She was aware, distantly, that her body was on the floor. She was aware that something warm was under her head that had not been there before, and that a hand was on her wrist checking for a pulse that she could have told him, if she could have formed words, was present but not interested in working very hard right now. "Lena," Kaden said. She was a long way away. "The pack is fine," he said. His voice was different from usual. Closer to the surface. The control thing was not all the way in place. All 60 of them. Gus is standing. His senior members are standing. The bond is clear, the pause. "You did it." She was aware that she should say something. She had no idea how. "Take your time," he said. Like she was choosing to be somewhere far off rather than unable to choose otherwise. But somehow it was exactly the right thing to say, because it had no pressure in it, no urgency, just the particular kind of patience he had shown her consistently since a packed earth floor in Ironveil when he had sat down and asked her what she wanted. She came back slowly. Like walking out of very deep water. Her first clear sensation was the floor, cold through her shirt. Her second was the hand on her wrist, which had not moved. Her third was the ache all the way through her, every part of her at once, the particular full-body exhaustion of having used something up to its absolute limit. She opened her eyes. Kaden was kneeling beside her. His public face was entirely gone. What was underneath it was a thing she did not have language for, something direct and unguarded and deeply specific to her, and it hit her hard enough that she had to look at the ceiling instead. "The 4th pack," she said. Her voice sounded like gravel. "The man I could not finish. I need to go back." He said. "Paul sent word this morning. He is recovering on his own. Whatever you started was enough." She closed her eyes again. 43 wolves saved. One saved across distance. A person behind this still somewhere in the territory. A high council still waiting for an answer other than no. She thought about all of that. And then she thought about the fact that she was lying on a floor in Ironroot with her head resting on what turned out to be Caden's jacket, which he had apparently put there at some point without making a production of it, and she thought about 17 days of roads and early mornings and cold halls and quiet rooms and a king who ate meals with her instead of at separate tables and asked questions and listened to the answers and had not once, in 17 days, treated her like something ranked below him. She sat up slowly. His hand moved to her back, steadying, and she let it. The council, she said. I have it handled, he said. You said no, she said. That is not handling it. It is the first step, he said. She looked at him sideways. I have 44 living wolves, he said, who were meant to be in the ground. I have signed accounts from 7 pack alphas. I have 3 identified not from an active person working inside my territory, which is a far larger problem than 1 Omega with a forbidden gift. He looked at her evenly. And I have a formal petition already filed to reclassify void magic from condemned to regulated, co-signed by Gus and 5 other pack alphas who were in this hall when their bond route cleared. She stared at him. When did you do all of that? She said. Gradually, he said. I am good at logistics. You filed a legal petition while I was on the floor, she said. You were taking a long time, he said, and there was the corner of mouth thing again, the almost smile that was not quite a smile but was something she had started watching for without meaning to. She looked at the great hall around her. The Ironroot pack were scattered at respectful distances, busy with their morning again, but watching with the careful side eye of people who had just had their entire world changed and were still taking stock of it. Gus was talking to one of his elders near the far door. He caught Lena's eye across the hall and gave her a single, formal nod that had more weight in it than most speeches. She looked back at Caden. What happens now? She said. We go back to the Citadel, he said. I meet the council. You come with me. You want me at a council meeting, she said. I want you at a council meeting where the primary evidence in my favor is currently sitting on the floor looking like she might fall over again, he said. Yes. She considered this. I have never been in a building that large, she said. It is not that large, he said. It has towers, she said. 3, he said. Modestly sized. She almost laughed. She had not laughed in she could not remember how long. She felt the shape of it arrive in her chest and then go past without quite happening, but it left something lighter in its place. She got to her feet. He stood with her, not grabbing or managing, just present, close enough to catch and far enough to leave the choice to her. All right, she said. The council. All right, he said. They rode back over 3 days. The same road, the same rhythm, but different. The 17 days of going had shifted something in the geometry of the space between them, the way a room rearranges itself when furniture moves, everything in the same place but the distances changed. She stopped pressing herself against walls when he was near. She noticed she had stopped doing it somewhere around the 2nd day back. On the 3rd evening, when they stopped at a way station between territories and the riders made camp outside and she and Caden sat at the indoor table with maps and his notes about the person behind the attacks, she said, without looking up from the map, what you said in Ash Hollow. Yes, he said. About having a reason, she said. Yes, he said. She looked up. He was looking at the map. Then he looked up, because she was looking at him, and the public face was not there and the banked fire eyes were not banked. You knew what you were doing when you sat down on Garrett's packed earth floor, she said. I had a theory, he said. A theory about what? She said. About whether you had ever had anyone pay attention, he said. And whether it would matter to you if they did. She held his gaze. Did your theory prove out? She said. I believe it did, he said. She looked back at the map. She moved her finger along the road toward the Citadel. She was aware of the warmth in her hands, rebuilt and present and settled, the way it always felt after a long rest, ready. I have never kissed anyone, she said, to the map. A pause. I know, he said. How do you know? She said. I have been paying attention, he said. She looked up again. His eyes were steady and waiting, no pressure, no urgency. The same patience he had shown in every hall and corridor and cold room from Ironmoor to Ironroot. She leaned across the table and kissed him. It was brief and quiet, and then she sat back and they both looked at the map. The person behind this entered from the eastern border, she said. Almost certainly, he said. His voice was very controlled. She could hear what was under the control. We should tell Paul to start there, she said. Yes, he said. Outside, the camp settled into night sounds. Inside, the map stayed spread between them and neither of them moved away. She thought, this is what it feels like to be in the right room. She had never known before. The High Council chamber was larger than anything Lena had ever stood inside. She stood in the center of it and did not let herself look up at the ceiling, because the ceiling was very high and the room was very full, and she had spent her whole life making herself small in rooms like this, and she was done doing that. Beside her, Caden stood in his Iron King's former coat, which she had seen him wear exactly twice and which suited him the way armor suited a sword, both functional and fitting. He was completely still. She knew by now what that particular stillness meant. It meant he was choosing every word 3 sentences ahead. The council chamber held 30 seats, and 28 of them were occupied by pack alphas, elders, and high-ranking representatives from the 7 territories. At the head table sat the 5 members of the High Council, all older, all wearing the particular expression of people who had decided how they felt before they sat down. The head of the council, a man named Frederick, had the practiced voice of someone who had been making formal pronouncements for decades. Alpha King Calder Voss, Frederick said. You are here on 2 matters. First, your use of a condemned form of magic in the conduct of what you have called a healing operation. Second, your refusal to present the practitioner for trial. I am here on 1 matter, Calder said. His voice was exactly what it always was, carrying without effort, taking up exactly the space it needed. The welfare of my territory. The rest is procedure. A murmur around the room. You were asked to surrender the practitioner, Frederick said. I was asked, Calder said. I declined. On what grounds? Frederick said. On the grounds that she saved 44 wolves that your tribunal was not attempting to save, Calder said, and that your tribunal laws were written in a century when void magic was understood as destructive rather than curative. The understanding was incorrect. The laws require revision. Frederick looked at him steadily. The laws are the laws. Yes, Calder said. And the mechanism for changing them is a formal petition co-signed by at least 5 pack alphas and presented before the full council. He produced the petition. Paul stepped forward and placed it on the head table. 6 alphas. Whose wolves are alive because of the woman standing beside me? The chamber was very quiet. Lena stood in the center of it and kept her hands loose at her side and her expression level and thought about supply sheds and dinner scraps and attendance lists that forgot to count her. Frederick opened the petition. He read it. He passed it left and right to the other 4 council members without speaking. The formal claim, he said finally. The Alpha King has also filed a formal mate claim. He has, Calder said. Placing the practitioner under crown protection. Yes. Which removes her from the jurisdiction of pack law. And places her under crown law, Calder said. Which I administer. And which I am revising. Lena looked at the head table. She looked at 28 faces around the room. Some of them were hostile. Some of them were uncertain. Some of them were the particular expression of people whose wolves were alive and who were doing the math. Frederick set down the petition. He looked at Lena directly for the first time. You are the Omega from Ironmoor, he said. The one who walked into Garrett's Warriors Hall and fixed what no one else could touch. Yes, she said. And the one who unraveled the root bond in Ironroot. Yes, she said. Gus signs this petition himself, Frederick said. Gus has not signed a council document in 11 years. No, she said. A long pause. The petition requires a full vote, Frederick said. He looked at the chamber. It also requires formal testimony on the practitioner's behalf from at least one wolf outside the claiming Alpha Sparks, he paused. Which means the Alpha King's testimony alone is not sufficient. A chair moved. At the side of the room, Gus stood up. I am not within his territory, Gus said. Ironroot is independent. My testimony stands on its own, he looked at Lena. 60 of my wolves are standing because she went in when she could not be sure she would come back out. That is all the testimony I have, and it is enough. Another chair. Vera, the healer from Ash Hollow, who Lena had not known would be here, stood in her traveling coat with her healer's bag still on her shoulder. She has her gift, Vera said. It is old and it is precise and the people calling it forbidden have never touched it. She sat down. The room was very quiet. Frederick looked at the petition. He looked at the chamber. He called the vote. 17 in favor. 8 against. 3 abstentions. Lena stood in the center of the chamber and heard the count and felt something change in the air around her, some weight that had been present since before she could remember simply lifting, the way a stone rolls off a slope and is suddenly no longer relevant. The petition passes, Frederick said, with the tone of a man who had expected a different result and was deciding how to feel about it. Void magic is reclassified from condemned to regulated under the revision committee of the High Council, with the practitioner Lena Ashvale assigned as technical advisor to the committee. Formal documentation to follow within 30 days. He looked at Caden. The Crown's mate claim is noted in the record. Thank you, Caden said. They walked out of the chamber. In the wide corridor outside, with its high windows and cold stone floor and absolute absence of anyone whose opinion she needed to manage, Lena stopped. She stood there. She pressed her silver-stained hands flat against her own legs and breathed. Beside her, Caden stopped. He did not say anything. He knew by now, she thought, when she needed silence. She had lived her whole life as the girl no one counted. The name on no list. The face no one marked when they swept the room. She had built her entire survival around the mechanics of not being seen, not being noticed, not being the person anyone chose to look at directly. She had entered this building as that girl. She was leaving it as something else. She was not sure yet what the something else was. She would need time to understand its edges and its weight and what it required of her. She was not afraid of that process. She had spent years understanding things from the inside out. She turned to Caden. He was watching her with the unguarded version of himself, the one she had learned was the real version, the one he wore in rooms with no audience. His gold eyes were steady and completely specific to her. The land, she said. That you promised. In writing. It is already drawn up, he said. Eastern boundary of the Citadel grounds. A house already standing. I want my name on the door, she said. It is already there, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. I have never had a door with my name on it, she said. I know, he said. She took his hand. Not urgently. Not dramatically. Just took it, the way she had taken the food he put in front of her and the chairs he found when she needed to sit and the jacket under her head on a floor in Ironroot when she was too far down to notice. She took the whole of it quietly, the way she intended to take everything he offered, with her eyes open and her hands full and the full understanding of what it cost and what it meant. Let us go home, she said. And Calder Voss, who had never waited for anything in his life and had been waiting for exactly this, said, yes, and held on. The person behind it all was found 6 weeks later, by Paul and a team that had been quietly working east the entire time. His name was Earl Maddox, and he had been a traveling trade advisor with access to 7 territories for 12 years, which was exactly as long as the threat cases had been appearing, and which explained the particular patience of his campaign. The knots were his craft. The threads were his ongoing work. He had been slowly weakening Caden's packs from within, one bond at a time, waiting for the day the damage was too widespread to recover from. He had not counted on Lena. When Paul's report arrived, Caden read it at the desk in the room adjacent to the one Lena used as a workroom, because she had begun documenting the techniques she had developed across the 7 packs, a precise manual that the revision committee had requested and that she was writing carefully and honestly and in her own words without softening any of it. He brought her the report. She read it. She put it down. 12 years, she said. Yes, he said. He was patient, she said. Yes, he said. She thought about patience. She had spent 6 years hiding. He had spent 12 years working against them. They had both been invisible, both operating in the space that other people refused to look at carefully. The difference was what they had been doing in that space. What happens to him, she said. Counsel trial, he said. Pack law applies to deliberate cause working at this scale. It is not a short process. She nodded. She set the report on the edge of her desk. She went back to writing. Caden stayed, leaning in the doorway with his morning coffee, which was a habit he had developed in the Citadel and which she had stopped noticing as unusual. She wrote. He drank his coffee and watched the morning come through the window. After a while she said, without looking up, there are 3 other practitioners in the Eastern Territories. I found references in the archive. 2 of them are old enough that they are probably gone, but the 3rd reference was recent enough that she might not be. Do you want to find her? He said. Yes, she said. Then we will, he said. She smiled at her page. She caught it this time, let it happen. She said. Yes, he said. Outside, the Citadel's morning sounds moved through the corridors and the yard and the gate, wolves going about their work. 3 buildings down, in the office where the revision committee had begun to meet weekly, someone was probably already asking questions she would need to answer later. She had a door with her name on it. She had a desk covered in documentation of a power the world had spent 3 centuries calling forbidden. She had a king standing in her doorway who could outmaneuver any council that tried to take either of those things back. And she had her hands, silver-lined and warm and entirely her own, doing what they had always been shaped to do. She had been doing it in the dark for 6 years. She was done with the dark. She turned the page and kept writing.